Classes are going to start up again soon, and you know what that means. It's time to make a syllabus. It is a dreary, dreary February, and that means that school is going to be starting soon. So I'm taking advantage of my last 2 days of wearing comfy clothes. You know, I am down bad crying at the gym right now. But let me tell you and let me show you how to make a syllabus for your lessons. Now, I'm an ESL teacher in China. I'm also getting my PhD in education. Now, I say that, but to be honest, my PhD didn't teach me how to make a syllabus. This is just comes from years and years of doing it again and again and again, and I feel like I've got this down to an art and I can make a syllabus pretty quickly. So if you're new to making syllabi, or maybe you just want some ideas for how to do it faster and more efficiently, I got you. Okay, what are you going to need to make your syllabus? So you're obviously going to need your textbook. I like to have a notebook where I can just jot down things, some pens, your computer, I guess. Computer might not be necessary, but I like to use Notion to plan out my syllabus. And also you're going to need your school calendar. Okay, let me walk you through the steps of how to make a syllabus. I haven't made my syllabus yet, so we're gonna be doing this together. This is my new textbook for next semester. It's called VOA. I teach in China. I don't know if I mentioned that before, and I'm going to be teaching freshman listening. So we're going to be doing a lot of listening exercises, but we'll also be adding in speaking as well. I've never taught this book before. This is brand new to me, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so what is the first step in making your syllabus? You might think it'd be to start with the textbook. No, we're not starting with a textbook yet. We start with our calendar first because we need to know how many lessons we are going to be teaching throughout the entirety of the semester. So I do have my school calendar that was sent to me. I'm just gonna look through the calendar and find out how many lessons I'm going to need for my freshman listening class for the entire semester. Maybe you teach your students every day. If so, wow, okay, that's a lot of lesson planning. I usually teach my students once per week. Sometimes that varies. Sometimes it's twice, sometimes it's 3 times, but this semester for this course, it's just 1 time per week. So it's actually quite handy. The school gives us this little card, I guess, with all of the schedule on it, but then the school has also sent me my schedule with more specific information regarding, you know, which students are going to have class at which time, which classroom, etc. Now, our semesters are typically 18 weeks long. However, they are freshmen, so sometimes they have to participate in these extracurricular activities. So I'm going to check my calendar on my computer just to see how many lessons do we need for this semester. That's what we're looking for. Okay, actually, all of the freshmen looks like they did their extracurricular stuff during the fall semester. So they will have 18 weeks of class. So that's really easy. I know from the start then I need to have 18 classes, 18 lessons prepared from this textbook. But we still don't pick up the textbook because you want to factor in any other special things like holidays. Maybe your school is going to have spring break, or maybe there's a traditional holiday during that time. Maybe, like I said, there's some type of extracurricular activity. For example, I'm also teaching my sophomores this year, and they are going to have a 2-week activity where they actually join an international furniture exhibition here in the city, and for 2 weeks they're not at school, they're volunteering, and they're actually being able to like speak English with different people from around the world, and they actually get a little bit of job experience from that. So for 2 weeks, I know those sophomore students aren't going to have class, so I would factor that in. Looking at the holiday schedule. Okay, looking at the schedule, there are 2 weeks when we have a holiday. So my number was 18. Now that number has gone down to 16 because for 2 of those weeks, the students will be gone. So now I know I only have to make 16 lessons from this textbook. We don't stop there. we keep going, because now it's time to decide the final exam. Why are we deciding the final exam so early? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a really good idea to decide your final exam now, because then you know the end point. You have an idea of what the students need to be able to accomplish before you start planning these lessons. You know what the end goal is supposed to be. So for my sophomore students, I've already taught that class before, so I already know that syllabus. But for my sophomore students, it's a business course, and they have to analyze a company and give a report on a problem, some solutions for different problems that company is having. So it's a good idea to know what your final exam is at the beginning. That way we can plan for it and we can prepare the students with our lessons. But it's also important to know from a logistics standpoint. For example, that sophomore exam is quite intense, and I know I'm going to need 2 or even 3 lessons for them to have enough time to present their findings and their solutions for the company. I need to know this so I know how many lessons to allot for the final exam. Because this is a listening course and a speaking course, and I know my school would rather have me do a speaking exam because they really do want me to focus on speaking a lot, because I am a native speaker and I'm the only native speaker that these students have. So in a lot of their other classes with their Chinese teachers, that's when they do a lot of written exams. So I know they're going to want me to do a spoken exam. So most likely the exam will be a presentation. Now, I have about 35 to 40 students in every class, which means if my exam is 2 minutes long, I have 90-minute classes, by the way. If my exam is 2 minutes long, we could probably do it all in one class, because if we have 40 students, 2 minutes, that's 80 minutes. You also need to account for time of like one student is sitting down, the next student is standing up, they're getting their PowerPoint ready. I think that's a little bit tight. Also, I would like the exam to be a little bit longer than 2 minutes. Yes, they are freshmen, but I think 3 minutes is a little bit better. If they're older students, I might go something like 4 or 5 minutes, but I think 3 minutes for freshmen would be appropriate, which means then I can't do it all in one lesson. We're gonna have to do it over 2 lessons. So now we took our number from 18 to 16. Now I know that the last 2 weeks are gonna have to be the final exam. So now we've knocked that number down to 14. There we go. Now I know I need to create 14 lessons from this textbook. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna see how many chapters are in this book. What are we working with? Fingers crossed, there are 14. I just got this book. I haven't even really like dug into it yet. I really hope there are 14. No, okay, well, not bad. Actually, that's kind of perfect. There are 7. That means then I could just have 2 lessons for every chapter, and that's an easy 14. Cool. Well, that worked out really, really well. Maybe it's not that easy. Maybe you need to have 14 lessons and you have 12 chapters. Then what are you going to do? Well, there are a couple of options. If this book had 12 chapters and I needed 14 lessons, one thing I could do is I could just add in some extra bonus lessons. I could add in 2 lessons that are all about culture. Or I could add in 1 lesson that's about culture. I could add in 1 lesson that's about pronunciation. I could add in a separate project. For example, maybe I have them working on a specific project or a specific presentation, and so then we have a presentation day or a project day. Last semester, I was teaching a cultural class. I wanted the students to research culture on their own and find out what they were actually interested in. So twice during that semester, we had the students come up and present what they had learned about different cultures around the world. So you could also do something like that. Another thing you could do is you can just take a look through the book and see which chapters are a little bit better than others, which chapters are a little bit meatier than others. Maybe every week you're in one chapter except for 2 of the chapters. If there's a particularly interesting chapter or there's a chapter with a lot going on in it, then you could just stay in that chapter for 2 weeks. For me, I know I need to make 2 lessons out of each one of these chapters. Now you might notice the book is quite thin, so I'm probably going to be adding a lot of my own stuff to this. I hope we're not going too fast. Let me know if you have questions along the way. This is the part where we slow down a little bit though, because now I'm gonna we haven't even really dug into this textbook at all. Now is the time to do that. I'm going to literally flip through the entire textbook and I'm gonna see what we're working with. Now, I did say I'll just divide it up 2 lessons per chapter, but sometimes there's just a really, really bad chapter. Maybe the chapter is really outdated, or maybe the material is just not appropriate for the student's English level. It's too easy or it's too difficult. So it could be, after looking through this, that I throw away one of the chapters and then I choose to expound a little bit more on one of the other chapters. I take one of the other chapters and we do 3 or 4 lessons from it. I'm going to use my pen and take some notes. This is all about news as well, so I'm also wondering if there are going to be some sensitive topics as well. I don't want any of the topics to be triggering to students. I also want to be careful because in China there are a lot of restrictions regarding what I could talk about in the class. So I'm just going to flip through this. Okay, so this book, like I said, is divided into 7 chapters, and each chapter does have a theme. For example, chapter 1 is about the economy and society, chapter 2, art, media, entertainment, chapter 3, science and technology, and then each chapter has like 5 or 6 subcategories. They're completely like unrelated to each other. They're just technically, tentatively connected to the topic. So for example, for the economy one, they have listening sections about the World Bank making predictions for the global economy. California voters reject food labeling requirements. Okay. Patriotic millionaires say their taxes are too low. E-commerce challenges traditional stores. The Nobel Prize in Economics recognizes market designers. And 6, the UN says family planning pays big for developing countries. What? That leads us to a bit of a problem, because the next step is to go through and kind of decide what your general theme is going to be for each lesson. Now, if you are doing 1 chapter, 1 theme, that's super easy to do, because then I could just say, oh, the theme is economy. But I need to make 2 lessons out of this. But the topics are just all over the place. We're talking about predictions for the global economy, Nobel Prize, e-commerce, taxes for millionaires, food labeling. These topics are all over the place. Here's where I'm going to use my notebook. I'm going to write down the main chapter topics, and then I'm just gonna brainstorm what we could talk about for each of these. For example, for the art and media chapter, they talk about the Vatican, the mother of modern dance, news from around the world, Oscar nominations, and rock and roll. Okay, I'm seeing some easy themes to pull from this. We could talk about art, we could talk about dance, we could talk about movies, we could talk about music. And I could decide that during my chapter 2, we're gonna talk about movies one day and music one day. And this is the loose tie that's kind of connected to these. I'm just going to take my notebook now, write down the main categories for the chapters, and just brainstorm what we could talk about in each of those. And that is where my lessons will actually come from. I do have the freedom at my school to just use the textbook as a guide, but then I can add my own material in as well. As long as we're using some things from the textbook, that's fine. We don't have to use everything. So right now, I'm gonna just do a little bit of brainstorming, see what we can come up with. I'm feeling much better. To be honest, I was feeling a little bit freaked out at all of the randomness in these listening exercises. Also, another problem that I noticed while I was going through it again is that the listening exercises are quite short, and the questions that they want you to answer are also quite short. So here they have what's that called? The transcript of what they're going to say in the listening exercise. And then they only have this page for questions. They do have a really excellent vocabulary section. I do really like this part. Now, I've not used this book before, so I don't know if I would recommend it, but so far, I really like the vocabulary that they're pulling. They're useful. They could be used in different situations. It also helps that I know I only have to come up with 2 lessons for each chapter. If I had to do more, I think this would be a little bit more difficult. But let me run through some of my ideas here. For the economy, I realized that some of the more interesting titles were the ones that were about millionaires. Who doesn't want to talk about millionaires and billionaires and being a millionaire? And if I had higher level students, I think it would be really interesting to ask questions like, are billionaires ethical? And what should millionaires and billionaires do with their money? But these are really low level students. They're not ready for that yet. I do really want to make this as practical as possible for students regarding their jobs that they'll have in the future. I know they're just freshmen. Even for the sophomore students, they don't have that many opportunities to learn like real things that they might actually use in the job market. So even though my freshmen are young, I do want to add a bit of that in there. I also really care about being a teacher that teaches more than just the textbook. I want these students to figure out like, what do they want out of life? What are they good at? What are they interested in? And so I think we will talk about, like, maybe as a warm up, we'll talk about millionaires and billionaires, but then I want them to talk about some maybe untraditional ways of earning a living. Maybe we'll talk about the pros and cons of being a freelancer and talk about starting your own business. I have done this activity before and students always enjoy it. I tell the students that they have to create a business, just a hypothetical business. And I break down the steps for them. I tell them it can be a product or a service and it has to solve a problem. And we like kind of go through the steps of brainstorming a business, and students always really love that activity. So I thought maybe that's something we can do. I think I want to talk about shopping because they talked about traditional stores versus e-commerce. I think I want to talk about shopping and have it be a little bit practical in that they can talk about their daily budget. You know, how often do you go shopping? How much money do you spend on this? What are ways that we can save money? What are ways that we can reduce our spending and reduce our consumerism? But then also, I know for my students, most of the time once they graduate, they get into a job where they're writing product descriptions for companies like Amazon. So maybe we can, even though they're young, even though they're freshmen, we're gonna start them off by writing imaginary product descriptions. I think that'd be really helpful. For the arts chapter, I think we're just gonna make it easy. 1 lesson about movies, 1 lesson about music. For the lesson about music, it's really easy to add dance. Dance and music obviously go very well together. And then art and movies go well together as well. I even thought it would be kind of fun if I showed them a piece of art and they had to like interpret it, you know, like show them some abstract art and they have to come up with what they think about the painting. That could be a really great way for them to use adjectives. For science, I think we're going to talk about social media. I like the idea of talking about like social media addiction because it does talk about like developing technology, especially with everything that happened with TikTok. I think it's kind of an interesting topic to talk about social media. Also, I know a lot of the students when they graduate, they do end up doing some like social media advertising for their companies. And then maybe we can do something like inventions, like which inventions changed the world, or maybe we could have the students create an idea for an app. I think that would be really interesting, but then also really practical as well, especially for things like creating an app. You have to think of the idea, but then you have to be able to clearly explain it to somebody else. And especially for freshmen, I often find that they struggle with explaining their ideas. They can answer questions, give them 2 minutes to just expound on what they mean by something and they really hesitate. For health, I think we're just going to divide this into 2 parts. Mental health, we can talk about stress, we can talk about anxiety, depression, and then we'll talk about like physical side of health, nutrition. For language, I'm so excited to see this one because tell me why, in all of my years of teaching, I've never had an ESL textbook that talked about language. Why? Anyway, I think I'm going to do one about like how to learn English and talking about learning styles and having students decide like what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. I think this also could be really good to do near the end of the semester. I'll talk about that in just a second. But as students get ready to go on summer break, kind of being more aware of how they study and how they can study by themselves could be really useful as they head into their break. And then I think I might do something kind of fun. Maybe in one class, we will watch a TV show together. Now, I don't just mean putting on a TV show and pucing out like some other teachers do. I mean, putting on a TV show, we're learning vocabulary from it, we're constantly pausing, we're trying to mimic how the actors say different things, we're learning slang, we're learning vocabulary, we're noticing grammar. I think that could be really fun, especially with a lot of different handouts. The next chapter is all about travel and hobbies. So I think travel would be a really fun one if we focus a little bit more on like itineraries, because that is something that a lot of my students have said that they've done. They've had to plan out different itineraries for their bosses. And then maybe talk about sports and hobbies. An easy lesson where students just get to share their opinions, share their ideas. And the last chapter is about the environment and animals. And I am so excited about this idea I had. We'll just do one lesson about the environment. Boring, we've done it 1,000 times. I love the idea of doing something with like animals in folklore. Maybe even something with like Chinese zodiac animals. I have an entire lesson about storytelling. I can link it in the cards and down below. But basically I give the students different giant pictures, and each group has 3 different pictures, and they have to create a story from the picture. And one of the pictures is always a frog, and one of the other pictures is a castle, and the last picture is a random animal. And it's always so much fun. It's one of my favorite lessons, and I just think that would be perfect for animals. And I love the idea of tying it into like folklore, Aesop's fables, Chinese zodiac signs. I think that would be so fun. Okay, wow. I'm feeling much, much better. When I first opened this textbook and saw how random the listening sections were, I got a little bit worried there. But this works out really, really well. Like I said, it's also nice that it's just 2 per lesson. Okay, let's review. What have we done so far in making this syllabus? First, we looked at our calendar to find out how many lessons we're actually going to need. We factored in things like holidays or any weird events that are happening. We also figured out our final exam. We're going to need 2 weeks for our presentation final exam. So now we know our final count for how many lessons we need. I also know that at the end, my students are going to have to give a presentation speech. So we're going to have a lot of speaking exercises built into the daily lessons. We flipped through the chapters and we decided how many lessons are going to be